So good morning, everyone. Welcome to FORPROLI YouTube channel. I am Givanildo Santos. I am an English language professor at the Federal University of Southern Bahia on campus Jorge Amado in Itabuna, and assistant coordinator of extension program Language Teachers Education, FORPROLI. And I'd like to welcome you to the 5th meeting of the project Let's Talk About Emotions, Talks with Experts, which is a joint action developed by the Applied Linguistics Research Group, GPLA, Emotions in Language, Teachers Education at the Federal University of Viçosa, UFV, led by Professor Ana Maria Ferreira Barcelos, by the Outreach Program on Language Teacher Education, FORPROLI, at the Federal University of Southern Bahia, and by the Language, Teaching, and Work Research Group at the State University of Rio de Janeiro, led by Professor Gisele Colombo. So, greetings to the professors Ana Maria Barcelos, Gisele Colombo, Suellen Martin, to Professor Richard Simpson, who is here, join us today. So, to our dear volunteers, Jamile Nascimento, Felipe Nunes, as well as all the participants who are here in the virtual room or on YouTube with us. I now invite you to the conversation circle titled Emotions Through a Small Lens by Richard Simpson. And to introduce our speaker for this meeting and mediate the conversation, I invite Ana Barcelos, who is a professor at the Federal University of Viçosa. Ana, welcome. And it's
Good morning, Giva. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for being here. Dr. Richard Simpson has been working at the Japanese education context for more than 20 years. He's currently an associate professor at Suellen University in Japan, teaching courses in English communication and language learning psychology. His research focuses on the social and dynamic emergence of language learning and teacher psychology by drawing on complexity thinking. He uses action research approaches to explore experiences of classroom language learning from the perspectives of students and teachers. Richard has published widely in international journals and is the author of Complexity in Classroom Foreign Language Learning Motivation, a Practitioner Perspective from Japan by Multilingual Matters 2016, and co-editor with Richard Pinner of Complexity Perspectives on Research in Language Learning and Teacher Psychology, also by Multilingual Matters 2021, and more recently of Complexity in Second Language Study Emotions, Emergent Sense-Making Social Contexts 2023 by Routledge. Welcome, Richard, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation. It's a pleasure to have you here with us.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and thank you for the invitation to come today. Shall I start sharing my screen? Is that okay? Okay, I will work my way around the technology. Just let me check that you can see okay. Yes, okay. So as Anna introduced, so I'm Richard Simpson. I work at a university called Chuo in Japan, in Tokyo. So I've already thanked Anna, but I'd like to thank everyone, all our participants, for being interested enough to take the time to join us today. And as you can see from the title, we're going to look at language learning emotions through a small lens. And what I mean by that will become clearer as we progress in the session today. So just to begin with a little overview of what we'll explore, I'll start by touching upon complexity thinking before moving on to some of my own research that reveals the diversity of emotions for language learners, then how emotions are constructed via the interplay of current and past experience, and then the ways in which they're kind of braided together in social interaction. Finally, I'm going to think a little bit about how we might represent emotionality in our research. So to begin with complexity thinking, this informs my way of considering emotions, and it encourages me to apply Emma Ushioda's small lens approach, which she initially proposed concerning motivation, but which encourages us to research in particular contexts with particular people. So we'll look at that a little as well. If we begin by thinking about the opposites of complexity, Edgar Morin, the French philosopher, argued that a lot of our research and our education and our thinking is based on the paradigm of simplicity. And what he means by that is something that involves disjunction, where we separate elements that are actually linked. For instance, when we look at distinct factors out of context and we remove them from the flow of time. And simplicity also denotes reduction, whereby we unify diverse elements. For example, when we average over a population. And if we think simplistically, we tend to make sweeping generalizations and predictions across people. But if we consider a classroom, a variety of individuals come to focus on a particular domain of learning. This is sometimes out of their own choice, but more often than not, it's out of obligation. They're required to do it. Nevertheless, there's a great degree of diversity across the individuals that come together, and we ought not to disjoin or reduce or generalize or presume to predict. So instead, complexity reminds us that we need to understand these people as people, people who have their own blends of cultural, regional, and familial backgrounds, their own unique past experiences, multiple intersecting psychological aspects, and ideas for the future. And these people are further situated in ongoing social relationships within and without the particular context in which we observe them, like a classroom. And these are people whose psychologies and unpredictable behaviors will emerge via their interactions. So in sum, we need to consider human psychology in a more dynamic and complex fashion. And I'd like to try a couple of thought exercises to introduce complexity more. So on the next slide, I'm going to show an object, and if you could somehow, I'd like you to think how you would describe that object and just type a word or two into the chat. Hopefully this will work somehow. So I'll just go to the next slide. Okay, so if you can, type something into the chat. Did we get anything? So
we are typing here. We have to, Jamili. Yeah, Jamili, is there anything there? Anybody typing anything on YouTube?
I'm sorry, it's a rather cryptic task.
That's okay. That's okay. That's okay. We can wait a little bit, no problem.
So maybe I'll just move on.
We have sorry, Richard, we have some like suggestions here or some answers.
Okay.
For example, Ana Barcelos said it's a small red square, and I said a pixel. And Gisele said, I can see a large square and a red small rectangle in the middle top of titanium. And Jamili said a red rectangle on top of the page. So we have these answers.
Thank you. These are all things that parts I predicted would come up. So yes, thank you for sharing that. So things like red, small, square, or rectangle were things that I guessed people would consider. So there's not a lot of meaning with just this object. So I'd like to try it again and look at the following object and think how you would describe it. Okay.
Oh.
Okay, so we have here, Anna said a heart. I said a pixel heart. And let me see the other one, Giselle, I guess. It was Valentine's Day in Brazil yesterday, so maybe it represents like the love.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so again, we have red, we have heart shape, a collection of squares or pixels, yes. And yes, thank you for attaching some meaning to it, such as love or maybe health as well would be another thing we could think about when we see this symbol. So my point here is that a fundamental understanding of complexity thinking is that patterns arise through the interaction of elements. So the parts interacting in certain ways comes together as an emergent phenomenon. But we can also go further and understand more if we look at interactions with an even wider context. And I'm not going to ask you to type anything about this. But if we look at the wider context as well, we can consider that meaning is also bidirectional. So the parts interact further to give meaning at a higher level, a larger context, but the higher level also gives meaning to the lower level. So we can infer now, because of interactions with this context, the specific patterns of meaning to this heart shape. So we can tell that Peach and Mario are in love. But with complexity, of course, qualities matter. So changes in the qualities of the parts can have important impacts on the emergent phenomenon. In this case, now, Mario and Peach are no longer romantically involved, but rather platonically supportive of each other because the qualities have changed. Equally, if we add or remove elements, or we alter the interactions between the elements, this can have a critical impact on the overall pattern. Don't worry, this is the end of using Mario and Peach. I do have one more thought exercise, though. So again, on the following slide, I'd just like you to look at the object, and if you can, try and describe what you see.
too small.
Anyone, have we got any guesses?
Oh, it's laughing.
Oh,
Can you see the chat, Richard? We are typing there some of the answers. Changing emotions, somebody said in the YouTube. People from YouTube, if you can type your answers there, please.
laughing, billiards ball, changing emotions, laughing. Thank you very much. Let's have a look. Okay, so it's a stadium wave. Again, so if we look at this, we can understand that the actions of our focal person, the person in the center we just saw, so this person standing and waving their arms in the air is contributing to a larger pattern or a whole when we zoom out. So without the contributions of this person and the contributions of the others, the whole would take on a different form. At the same time, we can also understand that the whole, this crowd, acts on the individual and it encourages certain behaviors and it constrains other behaviors. The focal person is prompted to act in a certain way in this situation. So to come to complexity now and to again draw on the ideas of Edgar Morin, complexity is a fabric of elements woven together. It's the one and the many. We can see a pattern through the colors of events, actions, interactions, retroactions, determinations, and chance, as Morin puts it. Some keywords for complexity. So it takes a strong focus on interactions, as I've been talking about, which change dynamically over time. So we need to look at things and consider time in our research. The parts are said to be co-adaptive in particular contexts. So this means that they change their behavior in response to the other parts, and the other parts likewise adapt their behaviors as well. The parts and the whole are also in open interaction with elements external to what we're focusing on. And the interactions are said to be self-organizing, so they're not controlled by an overarching leader. And a final keyword for complexity is emergence or emergent behaviors. So it's through particular interactions in particular contexts that this emergence occurs. So the holistic patterns that we can't predict based on the understanding of any one part, such as that one red dot that we started with. And this results in very interesting phenomena like this murmuration, this flocking pattern to starlings, the ecosystems in nature or in cities, or I would argue a class of learners and a teacher. There are some dangers, however. So the most common way of talking about the patterns is as systems. For instance, complex systems theory or dynamic systems theory. And whilst Larson, Freeman, and Cameron champion a complexity approach, they also note some tendencies towards a kind of distancing effect. So it makes things impersonal or mechanical, or it can. Emma Ushioda has also cautioned about this. So while a lot of her theorizing seems to align with complexity, she is a little hesitant to come completely on board because she's worried that particularly the specific terminology of complexity will lead us to lose sight of the real people that we should be thinking about in our research. And recently, Diane Larson-Freeman has been talking about complexity more as a meta theory, and this is what Ortega and Han are saying here. So it's more as a conceptual framework. It guides our quest for understanding and helps us understand what's meaningful or not, and so on. So this brings us to the small lens approach that Emma Ushioda proposed. And she, in this approach, she argues that we should take a more sharply focused or contextualized angle on phenomena of interest. And as I said before, she initially introduced it concerning motivation, but she urges us to look at how psychology connects with specific dimensions of linguistic development or particular learning events and experiences. And today, especially, I'd like to focus on the second of these to try to more deeply understand specific, uniquely experienced events and significant episodes. So Emma suggests that we shuttle between looking at particular people engaging in particular contexts with the environment, to homing in on particular psychological or behavioral processes within the person, but at the same time, we also remain cognizant of the ongoing historical context, and this will come up later with some of my data. We focus on interactions amongst these different levels to look more holistically at the experiences of real people. And just finally here, I think if contextualized interpretations are to be usefully uncovered, practitioner research can play a crucial role. As my colleague Richard Pinner and I put it previously, who has greater insight into the particular contexts under observation than an integral member? So if we adopt complexity, we claim more than simply research by teachers would be nice. We think that practitioner research is imperative if we want to do justice to the lived complexity of the people in our classrooms. So this brings me to some of my own work, and we'll start by looking at the diversity of language learner emotions. So I use, as part of my my practice, I use learner journals. This has both a pedagogical and a research purpose. And so I'm going to show you the reflection of one learner on the following slides, and I'll just give you a moment to read it. And you don't need to type anything into the chat, but just consider what kinds of emotions are coming up in this reflection. So just a moment to read by yourself. Okay, I know that's probably not long enough, but I'm going to move on. So hopefully you've got some ideas. So if we do a straightforward content analysis, we might come up with an array of different feelings. You might have different titles for these feelings, and we can represent them with different colors. So we might see enjoyment or amusement in some of these parts, or, for example, a sense of disappointment, and so on. I'm not going to highlight everything. And of course, these can be overlapping as well and different emotions at the same time. Regardless, if we take these different emotional colors, then we could represent this student, Mayu's emotional experience of this lesson, lesson 7, like this. Sorry. But of course, Mayu is not acting alone in the classroom, so we need to take into consideration the other actors making up the emotional context of the class on the day in question. Equally, we live through time, adding emotional experience, and so we need to incorporate the emotional narrative of Mayu across her lessons, as well as the narratives of her peers, which gives us something like this, which might seem a little overwhelming, but I still feel it's not sufficient, but it does allow somewhat more of an evocative representation of the emotional gestalt, or the palette for learners in any class group. And I've had some of my engineering students tell me that it looks something like a heat map as well. So there seem to be parallels between the natural world and what's going on in the emotions in my classes. Of course, at the same time, we still need to remain aware that emotional experiences within the classroom, mostly what these students have been writing about in their reflections, are nested within their ongoing lives outside the classroom as well. And those aspects will interact and interweave with each other and impact our learners, such as Mayu, in unpredictable ways. So I'd next like to add in a historical focus. So remember, this was part of the small lens approach, and looking at the emergence of emotions via the interaction between experience and the social context. So this will bring us to some interaction data, some video data in a second. So I'm drawing here on Feldman Barrett's theory of constructed emotion, where emotion is understood as not simply a reaction to some external trigger. Instead, it's via the interplay of internal and external sensory input and people's past experiences via which emotion emerges. So I'll give you an example here. Hopefully, yep, here it comes. Okay. So as an example, why are we afraid when we see a snake? Partly it might be due to instinct over generations and generations of human existence. We're instinctively frightened of long, thin, slithering objects. But if you consider this, my emotional experience of seeing a snake as an Australian who grew up with some of the deadliest snakes in the world in outback Australia. So my experience, my emotions will be qualitatively different from many other people's. For instance, my children who have grown up in urban Japan and have rarely seen snakes, and certainly not very deadly snakes. So how about this? Why are we afraid if someone points a gun at us? There's nothing inherently terrifying about that piece of metal. It's just a piece of metal. Instead, it's the interaction of our past experiences of guns. And for many people, we may have never seen a gun in the real world. It might be experiences from television or movies. So it's the interaction of those past experiences and the current situation that prompts an emotion. So just to consider the social for a second, as I said, we're going to look at some social interactions. Almost half a century ago now, Denzin argued that we need to return the social and situate emotion back in the world. And by doing so, by contextualizing, we study emotion in the world of lived experience and locate it in the personal biographies of interacting individuals. And through doing this, through contextualizing, we isolate emotions' meanings for those social actors. We present emotions in terms of their languages, their meanings, their understandings in context. So I'd like us to watch a short video of some students in one of my classes interacting. And this is during a short conversation session at the start of one of my lessons. They're discussing their favorite musicians. I'll switch over to the video in a second, and apologies in advance that the sound isn't great. I do have some subtitles turned on to help you. And again, as you're watching, please consider what emotions arise in the course of this interaction, especially for the center student. Okay, so I'll just switch over.
What's the best music? What music do you like?
It's very fun.
Song is very emotional. Lyrics are very exciting. I like it too.
Okay, you probably have your own interpretation of what we just watched. Just let me go back to sharing my slides. Okay, so you might have experienced some discomfort yourself while you were watching this. You might have interpreted discomfort for these students. There was considerable silence and hesitancy, maybe some anxiety you could have interpreted.
Looking up, some of them, while they were talking, they were looking up as if they were reflecting. But it's interesting because what caught my attention was the guy behind them, who seems to be having fun. He smiles, and I was observing them talking, but the guy behind them seemed to be so much fun talking about the topic they were discussing that I started to pay attention to the guy behind, and trying to guess what he was talking about.
This is interesting. I no doubt have a video of the group behind as well. Let's focus on these guys.
Yes, okay, yeah. But they seem to be in doubt or feeling insecure about answering the question or the topic.
Let's have a look. So if we have a look at Akito, the center student's reflection on this lesson, so he does talk about anxiety and that he should have more confidence. But he also references enjoyment and gratitude. And this seems maybe a little incongruous. So, he's writing this reflection. Is he simply writing to please me as the teacher? If we go back in time, we can get a little bit more insights. And this is where the historical aspect comes in. So back in lessons 6 and 7 and actually 8, Akito was in a different work group. And if you read what he wrote in his reflections, well, the parts of the reflections that I'm showing here, it seems that he had a particularly bad experience with one of the group members in this previous group who was aggressive and angry about Akito's speed of communication. So if we then shift ahead in time, we can see that when he moved to the current group in lesson 9, he felt relief, being more comfortable and able to enjoy their interactions. The new members are cheerful and they cackled. I guess that means they laughed. So he's a lot more comfortable in this group and he could talk more smoothly with them. So based in this experiential context, we can go back to the video and notice or reinterpret a range of ways in which Akito's group members were actually supporting him via their verbal prompts, their gestures, their body positioning in mostly facing towards him, their use of rephrasing and clarification, and also just their silences as patience, allowing him to get his ideas ready. And so what I'm finding in my research is that there's this constant interaction between different timescales in the construction of emotions. For example, quite short timescales like utterances or activities, medium timescales like the lesson, or longer timescales. Oops, sorry, I've jumped. Longer timescales such as students' experiences of additional language study, or their things like their personalities, their beliefs, their identities over a lifetime. And as the data that we've just seen helps us to understand these interactions are bidirectional. So longer time scales afford and constrain emotions in the moment. So from the video, Akito's enjoyment and sense of achievement is located within his previous recent experiences with that more aggressive partner from the previous group, and comparisons with the situation in the new group. At the same time, emotions in the moment, at the utterance or the activity level, update these same longer timescale aspects of our psychology. So Akito's new experiences of enjoyment in this group will, of course, feed forward and inform his future emotionality, his future ideas about learning and interacting with other students in this class group. So as a final example from my research, I'd like to examine the social emergence and function of emotions as they're braided together in interaction. So the cultural psychologist Bacha Mesquita argues quite convincingly in my reading that because our brains are dynamically wired via our experiences in specific social and cultural contexts, this will naturally lead to different qualities and functions of emotion. And while the predominant view, mostly from North America and North American psychology, insists that emotions are internal, individual experiences, cultural psychology shows that this is quite rare in the world, and instead many cultures consider emotions as more public, social, and relational. And my colleagues and I have certainly found this in some of our data, that emotions are kind of braided together in interaction. So let's look at the social and culturally specific nature of emotions with some of my data. We're going to look at a video and reflections of a group of 4 female Japanese undergraduates in a compulsory additional language English discussion course. So these are not language major students, they're from other faculties. This is post-COVID, but when we were back in the classroom, so they are going to be wearing face masks. And their task here was to discuss different kinds of Japanese pop culture that they would recommend to people from other countries. And when we looked at this data, this particular example, there was a kind of a contrast across 11 minutes of the discussion. We're not going to watch 11 minutes, but I'll show you some parts. So firstly, let's watch the very end of the discussion for these students. So this part right on the right there at the end of the sound wave. If you can, again, please keep a note of what kinds of emotions you think they might be experiencing. This video I'm about to show is very short, and I don't have subtitles on this one. The others I do, sorry. Just let me change my sharing. Sorry, I need to rewind it. Okay. Okay, let me change back again. Okay, so although they swiftly changed to Japanese when the chime sounded for the end of the discussion, you might have interpreted, for example, bemusement as they laughed in being cut off by the alarm announcing the end, or disappointment via their sighs, or for anyone who caught the Japanese, I'm not sure. One girl, Nami, the second from the left there, her kind of motivation as she spoke of wanting 3 more minutes. She showed this gesture for 3 more minutes for the discussion. And actually Tsuki, the girl on the right there, she echoes this both verbally and she very quickly does the same gesture as well. So we can maybe interpret motivation to continue the discussion there. So anyway, this kind of disappointment at the end of a discussion doesn't happen. So usually students in my classes are quite happy that the discussion has ended and this is the end of the class, so they can go off to lunch. So I was interested in why they were disappointed here, what happened here in this discussion. So I went back to look at their reflections, and you've already seen the reflection of Mayu earlier on when we were looking at diversity. So maybe take a look at the reflection of Tsuki just for a moment. I'll give you some reading time. Okay, I'm aware that time is pressing, so I'll just continue on. So I won't highlight all of this, but for example, there's mentions of enjoyment and excitement, and most importantly for me, for what I noticed, was that they both reference a lack of time. So it seems like they were disappointed that the discussion had come to an end. So this got me interested in looking at the entirety of their discussion. But what I noticed, though, was that the first 4 minutes were not actually very exciting or seemingly enjoyable. As you can see from the sound wave here, one indication of very emotional utterances is the intensity of a sound wave. There's not a lot of intensity in the first 4 minutes of their discussion. So see what you think of, sorry, not that, this short segment. So I'll switch over to a video again.
I recommend kawaii culture too. For example, Japanese fukushoku student, fashion student, is very characteristic. Their hair is pink, blue, and they wear red ribbon or damaged clothes and so on. Or junk they wear. So I like kawaii culture, and when foreign culture want to experience kawaii culture, they should go Japanese fashion student school. They can see.
Okay, I'll change back. Okay, so from that part of the video, we can see that Tsuki is doing most of the talking. She's using the taught discussion skills of introducing an opinion, reasons, examples. The other three students are mostly simply listening and occasionally using what's called aizuchi in Japanese, or back channeling. The other students don't seem particularly engaged. They're not adding content to the discussion. As a group, though, they are following the imposed communicative style. But from around the 4-minute mark of the discussion, something changed. So we're going to watch a short part here. Again, sorry, let me change. So we're going to see one student, Nami, the second student from the left. She's recommending Japanese music from a certain period.
I want to recommend 60s and 80s Japanese music. I think this music will not feel old music, so it is very very good. Yes, Showa's era's music. Yes. Matsuda Seiko. Aquino. Nakamura. Maria, Yamashita. So good music. So I think this Showa era music should recommend foreign people more.
Okay, I promise this is the last time I'm going to change back and forth. Okay, so if we take this part of the interaction, so Nami had introduced 60s and 80s Japanese music, but Mayu, the girl on the left there, she seems unsure what that means, and so she confirms that they're talking about the Japanese Showa period. And actually this is the more normal way of talking about this period of time in Japan. It's kind of obscure to talk about 60s and 80s Japanese music. So this action seems to prompt the first and maybe essential change in the dynamic of the discussion. So the students start braiding their utterances together, and this is something that is particularly common in Japanese conversation. So they mutually elaborate an image of Showa musicians. They start throwing around the names of Showa musicians and agreeing with each other using a cooperative form of conversation. And this is very different to the first 4 minutes of English conversation style. Again, although it's an English discussion, the students frequently use aizuchi, back channeling, in this part to encourage each other and affirm utterances. Again, this is very common in Japanese conversation. But it's not only their verbal contributions, so they're much more active in using embodied behaviors such as gaze and gesture and nodding to kind of weave each other into the discussion. For example, when Mayu and Nami point in agreement when they're trying to think of the name of a singer or excitement there. But also you might have noticed Kana, although she's quieter than the others, near the end she has a lovely lighthouse gaze where she looks around the group to wrap up the image and the stanza while she says "ee," like kind of nice, agreeing that all the things that they're saying are nice. And finally, their smile voices, their voices that are influenced by kind of laughter, and their laughter represent and invite shared enjoyment. So what seems to happen is that the students cease to maintain the English conversational style, even though they're still speaking in English. And instead, from here, they transition to a style of conversation that they're more comfortable with from Japanese culture. This style that involves them all a lot more in the discussion. And together with this move to their natural style, they express their enjoyments, they develop a sense of togetherness. So they braid their interactions and their emotions together. So what this reminds me of is the ethical perspective recently of Emma Ushioda. I'm sorry to draw on Emma so much, but that people in our classrooms are not merely language learners. This is an identity that we, of course, impose on them when they come into the classroom. So it's got me to thinking what the psychological, especially we're concerned with emotions, so what the emotional and pedagogical benefits might be of encouraging our learners to be and become themselves, drawing attention to and allowing them to cherish their own identities and their own interactional styles. So not forcing the interactional style from whatever language they're using, especially for learners who are not language majors. So this brings us to the last part of the presentation, but I just want to check with Anna. Are we still okay for time, or should I give up?
No, we're okay with time. Please finish on your time. You're great. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. So as I said at the start of the presentation, I'd just like to look quickly at how we represent the emotionality of language learners. And so with the examples that I've shown today, I hope you can get a sense of how emotions are experienced, expressed, and functional in the present, in the social context. At the same time, they're also constrained, afforded, and interpreted via our experiences and our aspirations for the future. So emotions kind of emerge through these interactions. And although I've been more recently working to look at emotions in a kind of complex fashion using students' interactions, both discourse analysis and conversation analysis primarily rely on textual representation. But as Lemke has written over 10 years ago, we don't need to rely on textual representation anymore. We have other tools, other technologies that are readily available. And so I've written quite harshly that sometimes transcripts look more like computer code than conversations between real people. And I've done this as well. So Murphy is even more critical, stating quite bluntly that many transcripts are just bad because they repel readers, they force readers away. He argues that transcripts can become a kind of code that needs deciphering rather than allowing us to understand scenes of real humans interacting. So in response, one possibility that I've been experimenting with recently is multimodal representation, particularly drawing on the work of Norris. So in this kind of transcript, we use images to describe the dynamic unfolding of moments in time, to represent not only verbal action, but also embodied action, layout, and things like that. So I'll show you a quick example. So we arrange images from a video recording, and we add utterances with different contours to represent changes in volume, emphasis, intonation, things like that. We also add arrows or other markers to draw attention to embodied actions that are particularly, that seem particularly important at that point in time. And so we move through time like this to build a kind of comic transcript that shows the scenes in which we're interested and shows the passing of time. At the same time, though, we don't only do this, we support the transcript with a narrative interpretation. So it's the interplay between this kind of visual and narrative interpretation via which I think we can build a more evocative representation of, in our case, emotionality. So just to wrap up, not with a summary, but with a few questions generally for where we might go in the future. Firstly, I think there's a lot of space to develop more contextualized understandings of emotions. One way, as I've shown, is via multimodal representations of actual interaction that show the scenes more clearly. Second, although we're starting to consider more the diversity of emotions and how they come about, we need to explore the function of emotions, what they actually do or achieve or constrain in language learning. But importantly, as the example of Aquino, the male student who appeared anxious, as that example reminds us, we need to do this in a way that takes account of the personal perspectives and experiences of individuals. And lastly, but not least, how can we leverage emotions? How can we make them useful for learners rather than hindering learning? That's it from me. I do need to just quickly show you my bibliography credits for things that I've drawn on, and also for the images. So I'll just quickly go through that so that it's there. You can look at this later if you want to. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Richard, for this wonderful presentation. You know, I'm in awe with all the slides and all the technological things that you did. I'm like, oh my God, I mean, I don't know, medieval age.
No.
I don't know how to do any of that. So it was amazing, you know, the videos and the animations and everything. So beautiful slides. Thank you so much. And also, of course, the what you said, what you brought about emotions. It makes us think about emotions as live, you know, lived experience, you know. So there are some questions here from the audience. One question, at least at first. I hope they will bring more. I would like to start by asking you, because what you presented us is a real holistic account of emotions, you know. So it really gives us an idea of learners as holistic people, you know, not only language learners. So thank you for reminding us of that. I was curious because you look at gestures, voice, you know, the sound waves, something that I had never seen before, you know, look at the sound waves. So I was curious, are you doing all of this? I mean, of course, with the technology, the technological resource, but all of this by yourself? How can we do this kind of research? I mean, the cameras, the microphones, everything. Please tell us.
Yeah.
Well, as you saw in the video of Aquino, the microphones, it's in a classroom, so it's sometimes very hard to get clear sound. I certainly haven't solved that problem. The video cameras that I was using with Akito's data, that's quite a long time ago now. Right. The data with the discussion students was the same video cameras, but those classes were a lot smaller, so there was not so much background noise for each group that I was recording. But they record 360 degrees, and there are better cameras now. This kind of thing here. So I guess in some ways I'm lucky that I'm in Japan, because Japan,
yes, I was going to say that,
has technology.
Yes.
I actually came to Japan because I was initially interested in music, and Japan makes good synthesizers. And I didn't know that years later I wouldn't have anything to do with music, but I would still be buying Japanese technology for my work.
Right.
How can we do this in the classroom? Yeah, it does take. I am doing it mostly by myself. Recently, I've been working together with another Japanese researcher to collect data, but also it's kind of interesting to have outsider, insider perspectives on things, because I've lived in Japan for over 20 years, more of my life in Japan than in Australia.
Right.
So I kind of have an insider perspective, but I'm not Japanese.
Yes.
So it's useful to work together and get the perspective of a Japanese co-researcher.
Yeah.
But it is very draining to collect this kind of data and to try and go through it all. It does take a lot of energy.
Yeah, it's a lot. And another question I have is, what about the images? Because here in Brazil, when we go to videotape students in the classrooms, you have to have their permission. So how do you do with that?
Yeah. So again, so years ago, I was working in a kind of special high school, not university setting. And to get consent with high school students, you of course had to involve the parents and the school a lot more, and that was a lot longer process. Because the data I'm collecting now is at the university level, I simply ask the students, and usually they consent. I do tell them that I'm going to put filters on the images, and they get to see the kinds of images that I'm using.
Okay.
I have also had questions from reviewers of articles about how can we know that this is natural data? How can we know that they're not performing for the camera?
Oh my goodness.
And yeah. Well, my answer, and it seems like I kind of looked for something to support me with this from interactional research, is that basically it's just common sense. But when the camera is first placed in front of students, yes, they're very conscious of it. So data from the first lesson you can't really use unless it's data about how students react to having a camera placed in front of them. But as time passes, they just get used to them, and they don't notice them anymore. So they're not performing for the camera.
Yeah.
And so most of the data that I've been using has been from later on in the semester.
Okay. Great. Yeah. Thank you, Richard. There is a question related to that by Júlia Braga. Let me see here. We have more questions. Júlia said, Great representations. I think she was talking about the color. She said, easier to spot patterns, loved the tapestry, also enjoying the time scales in the construction of emotions. Another great representation. What software was used for the time scale?
I'm sorry, I don't remember. It was, I made those images years ago. I think it was just some kind of drawing software that I used to make the kind of landscapes. But it was based on data about the fluctuations of emotions in, you know, settling into either kind of a pleasant trajectory or an unpleasant trajectory of emotions over a semester. I haven't been able to get that published anywhere. So
Really?
Maybe it's too abstract or something. But this is something that I do feel about kind of complexity research. You know, some of it does go a little too far in using the terminology and using very abstract images. And so I've kind of, years ago, I was more in that direction, but recently I've been kind of toning it down more and trying to, as Emma suggests, consider people as people, because I'm a language teacher and I care about my learners and I don't want to make them into just systems or things like that. So I'm sorry to the person who asked the question. I'm sorry that I can't tell you what software I use.
That's okay.
Well,
thank you.
Let me ask you something. Well, I was really curious about the colors you chose to represent emotions. Did you use Plutic wheels to base your choice?
I didn't. To be honest,
Plutic wheels has similar colors.
Yeah, and I think there are, you know, recently there are various like phone apps as well that have these kinds of different quadrants. And so I think that would be one interesting direction to go with like classroom-based data. If, you know, I don't know what it's like in Brazil, but in my classrooms, you know, everyone's got their phones, and so they could very easily just click on a particular emotion that they're feeling at this point in time in the lesson, and you could gather all of that data and get very dense data from all of your students about different points in your lesson, and, you know, find what kinds of activities are eliciting what kinds of emotions for the learners. So in answer to your question, no, I didn't base it on anything. It was just my kind of feeling at the time. Later, I became aware of that this is a thing in emotion research. But at the time, I just used the colors that seemed right to me.
Okay, thank you. There is another question by Luciana Marchetti Passos. Amazing presentation. I read part of your book, but seeing the dynamic and interactive presentation is another experience. Are you still developing this research?
Yes, particularly recently, I've become interested in, you know, I'm interested in looking at interactions, and you know, I do think that what we do with our bodies, what we show with our bodies, is very important in not only our own emotional experiences, but how that impacts other students around you in the classroom. And I'm sorry to say that I don't think we've done a very good job of representing that so far. So I think we can do a lot better, particularly with the technology we have now. You know, like journal articles, we used to have to print them, and I still prefer to read them in print. But most international journals now are all online, and so we can have images. We don't need to worry about the costs of printing out images or colors or things like that. So I'm interested in interaction. I'm also getting increasingly more interested in trying as an outsider to develop a more localized understanding of emotions for Japanese people in Japan, because, as I said at the very outset, most of our theories about emotions, most of our research about emotions is very influenced by North American psychology. And living in Japan, experiencing the culture, you kind of notice that there are things that might be applicable across, that are applicable for all human emotions, but there are other things that are certainly very different in this culture. And so I'd like to develop a more kind of insider view. There's one famous emotion, amae, that doesn't translate very well into English. It has a kind of negative translation in English. But I've noticed amae in the interactions between my students, and this is something that just hasn't been looked at all, but it's a very Japanese thing. So this is one direction that I'm interested in developing more in the future.
What is amae? I don't know. I've heard, but I don't know what it is. Can you try to explain?
Yeah, in English, it kind of translates into a feeling of interdependence, but basically, initially, the initial idea was developed by a Japanese psychologist, and he looked at it between children and particularly mothers, so that the child kind of acts childishly, and the mother indulges that childish behavior. But so this kind of interdependence between them, the mother actually feels good about indulging the childish behavior, and the child feels kind of wrapped up in the mother's love through this. So it's kind of something that emerges between these two people. But more recent research has shown that it's not only between mothers and children. This happens between adults as well, not just in romantic situations, but in other kinds of interaction as well. And so, yeah, I wasn't looking for this in my data, but it seems to be something that is there sometimes.
Okay, thank you so much. And your answer reminded me of how much I was paying attention to the trio of the three guys and how patient they were with the guy in the middle, just waiting and listening. And I thought, wow, that's so interesting. And I kept imagining what it would be like in Brazil, because we talk on top of each other, as you might have noticed in our conversation here, right? So it would be very interesting.
I'm wondering, Anna, like the final data that I showed where the students in the discussion, so when they started using the more kind of Japanese conversational style and they were just kind of braiding their utterances together, is it like that in Brazil? Would people talk like that?
Yes. We talk on top of each other, as my American friend said once. Yeah. Especially when we are excited, right? We just jump on each other's turns and that's it. Okay, so we have lots more questions here. Sorry. Fernanda Silveira, she said, considering the time scale importance in complexity, how long do you think research should take at least? She has other 2 questions as well.
Okay, quickly. It probably depends what. I think you need to decide what time scale in particular you want to focus on, and then gather data about that time scale and hopefully time scales either side of that. So I'm, what can I say? Partly my decisions about the kind of data that I gather are based on an understanding of timescales, but partly they're just what I started researching with, and they seem to be useful for uncovering timescales. So, I think learners' reflections can give us insights into, what they were experiencing during a lesson, their interpretations of that. But they also often include information about longer timescales as well. So their past experiences, their hopes for the future, these kinds of things. So asking learners to write journals, write reflections about their experiences in the classroom, I've found it very useful to uncover different timescales. And the usual way that I find something interesting in my video data is not by looking at the video data, it's by what students say in their reflections. And then, oh, that's interesting, they're referring to a particular moment here. So let's have a look in the video and see if I can see what's going on during what they're referring to, what they're reflecting on. And then, okay, let's see what other students in their group have said about this. Did they mention anything about the same moment? So we can kind of build up a picture of different timescales by incorporating the perspectives of various learners in a group or in a pair or whatever as well, I think.
Right. Thank you. Now, the other 2 questions, I think you have answered them because it was the question that Giza asked about the choice of colors. So both Júnia and Fernanda asked, they would like to know more about the choice of colors. How
I'm
did you choose the
sorry.
colors, That's okay. And then Fernanda asked, how does the concept of attractors interact with your research?
Yeah, so this is something that I did try to use in the past, more when I was looking at motivation. I have used it a little with emotions. Basically, I started using the idea of attractors and repellers. So attractors, the idea that we settle into certain patterns of behavior or we move away from certain things. And a couple of things happened to mean that I didn't continue using attractors in my research. It's not because I disagree with the idea at all. I think it's a very, very useful metaphor. But what happened was, one, I wrote a paper on motivation using attractors and repellers, focusing in on 2 different students. One student who settled into a very motivated state, and one student who settled into a kind of demotivated state, but was motivated in certain other ways. And I tried to show this through attractors over time. And I sent it to, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 different journals. And, they asked me to revise it each time, and then it just turned into a paper that wasn't the paper that I wanted to write. And so in the end, I just decided, no, I don't want to publish this anymore. It's not the paper I was interested in doing. So I just kind of gave up on it. So that was one thing that happened. And the other thing was just I got a little disillusioned with all the terminology in complexity. And as I said at the start, I think it's useful to remind us of certain things. It's a useful way of thinking, but we don't need to use the terms, the models and things too much.
Yeah.
I think it's more useful to just be reminded that people are people, and to make decisions about research based on that.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Richard, and thanks for also saying about the rejection, because we all assume that, you know, oh, we get everything published immediately, you know, there is no rejection. It's not like that. And so it's nice when we see, you know, somebody so accomplished as you are, you know, to say this. So thank you so much. And I also agree about the complexity, something that discouraged me. I like the idea as well, but I really feel discouraged by the, you know, all the terminology in complexity research. So there is one more question here. So since we are talking about that, Fernanda just commented, is it a trend in applied linguistics to avoid using complexity dynamic system terminology?
I don't know.
That's a big question. That's a difficult question, Fernanda.
Yeah. I don't know whether I can comment definitively here, but I seem to have noticed a change in the atmosphere. So I think, what, five years ago or so, there was a lot more movement towards complexity, and people were still figuring out how much to use that kind of terminology, how much to invest in complexity. And, you know, I think like the seminal book of Larson, Freeman and Cameron is an amazing book, and it certainly helped me to understand complexity at the start. But, you know, Diane seems to have also kind of moved back a bit from fully using complexity, you know, to going too overboard with complexity. And as I said, she seems to refer to it more as a meta theory now. And I tend to agree with that. I don't, you know, I think there are useful terms, but if you load your paper with those terms, then it just makes it's inaccessible to a lot of people. So I think like the edited book that we published a number of years ago we were trying to make complexity more accessible. I don't know how successfully we did that with that book, but even going to conferences, I think there are fewer presentations that are so upfront with complexity these days compared to the past.
Right.
But, you know, like maybe people like me, I'm not including the word complexity, you know, in bold letters so much anymore, even though my research is very underpinned by complexity. So maybe there are people like me as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Giza, would you like to ask your questions now? The mic. Now you need to turn.
Sorry. I don't think if we have enough time for so many questions, but something that I was curious about was the context. Is this course part of a program for, no, it's not international. So is it part of a college? Of
Sorry,
a university? Is it a part of a university course?
The data that I was showing?
Yeah.
So yes, the data was collected from university students, just in general English classes. So students in Japan, I don't know what it's like in Brazil, but students in Japan start studying English kind of later in primary school, junior high school, and then if they continue to university, then the first usually 1 or 2 years they have to take some compulsory English classes, and usually another language as well. So there's a very big industry in Japan of people teaching English at the university level, but most of those students are not language majors, and most of those students will not use English in their futures, which is why near the end I argued, you know, do we need to try and impose the English identity on them? Do we need to impose the English conversational style? If they're having fun using the Japanese conversational style, but they're still speaking English, isn't that good? That, I think that's great that they're enjoying talking in English, you know, let them do that.
Yeah. When I saw that, when you said that, I specifically thought about our Brazilian students. I think we speak in our Brazilian way. We speak English with our Brazilian, personalities, don't we, Giva?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is, you know, this course, the last set of data that I showed, it does do a fantastic job of supporting students, because it's a stereotype, but many Japanese students, you know, they study grammar and vocabulary for entrance exams, but little speaking ability. And when they come to university and they take this course, you know, before your very eyes, from the first lesson to the last lesson, you can see their speaking ability develop so much. But at the same rate, it does very much introduce them to predominantly North American English conversational style, and they're graded based on whether they can use that particular way of discussing, and yet they enjoy it when they're not doing that. So, you know, which one should we be valuing more?
Well, I asked this question because in terms of context, Ana, Sivanildo, and I myself, we teach at university for students who are studying to become an English teacher. So we have different kind of problems, and I generally use journals. You can imagine how many journals I've got, because I use this technique, and that's why I loved what you did. So I'll try next semester having them labeling their texts. So it was an amazing idea, because I did it myself, and then I got them to talk to me about that. So I showed them my impressions, and then they discussed that. Sometimes I was surprised because, you know, I imagined something, and then when I got when I talked to them, they say, no, that was not what I meant. And you did the opposite. So I think that it's a fantastic way for us to analyze data before we do that. They themselves do that.
Yes. Yeah,
great job.
I found journals, you know, just incredibly useful. I mean, I guess different people, you know, kind of prefer different ways of collecting data and things that work for them. But over many years, I've tended to think that journals match my style of researching, and they don't. For me, because my students are not language majors, and I don't want to add extra burden to their classes. So this is something that I think helps them to reflect on their learning. So it has this very good pedagogical aim as well. But it doesn't take time away from what they're supposed to be doing in classes. What's it? I always forget the term. Stimulated recall is something that I'm interested in as well. But because my students are not language majors, I find it difficult to ask them, hey, I've just recorded you. Can you now come back again and watch the video of you doing this? And then I'm going to interview you about what you noticed in the video as well. This is, for my students, this is just too much to ask of them. So, I'm sure that it works well in certain contexts, maybe with language majors who have maybe more interest in seeing how their language is developing, seeing what kinds of emotions they're experiencing. But for my learners, they're taking a compulsory language course that it's not their choice at all. So I don't want to burden them with too much.
Yeah, people in my group say that I get myself my own burden when I ask them to write, because I ask them questions they're supposed to develop, and then when they answer, I make comments for them to reflect on it, on the questions. Yeah, and so if at the end of the semester I have the journals with so many questions and answers, and I learn from them. But if I do that, what you did, I think that it's going to help me a lot.
I'm glad if anything is helpful, then I'm very happy.
And I'm very happy and grateful for the idea you gave us. It was really amazing, your presentation with the image. I was curious if you developed the presentation on Canvas, or if you have a special program. Share the secret, please.
No, it's just boring PowerPoint, I'm afraid.
Wow.
I don't know if I should say boring, if that's...
It's not boring. No, not at all. Not at all. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just what I'm used to, and I enjoy making presentations. I like the kind of the mix of images and text and things like that. So
yeah, you can tell.
Yeah, we can tell. Exactly.
Thank you.
Well, unfortunately, we are coming at the end of our time here. Before I pass it over to Jiva, Junia also commented that she has the same feeling about the terminology, especially with social groups. Loading the discussions with some of the terms can be problematic. Okay, so Junia is a professor at Federal University of Minas Gerais in my state, and she works with complexity theory along with other researchers here as well. She's been doing that for a long time. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So Junia can reach out to Richard, if you want to talk more, or anybody, by the way,
Yes, please.
So,
yes, please.
Yeah. So you have email, or you can find his email easily on internet. So Richard, thank you so much. This has been, an amazing talk, an amazing morning, discussing about your research. And we are so happy to have this opportunity with you. And we hope we can have other opportunities in the future. Okay, so you are always welcome in Brazil. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for inviting me again, and for the discussion afterwards as well was fantastic. It's very nice to have very pinpoint questions and comments to engage with this. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Professor Richard, again. And thanks for making us think about, how important it is to use emotional relevance to tie content to learners' experiences, values, or cultural backgrounds. And I'm sure this boosts engagement and retention. So thank you so very much. And on behalf of GPLA, LET, and FORPROLI team, I would like to thank everyone who is here on the channel again. And don't forget to follow us on our social networks, FORPROLI.UFSB, and let Linguagem, Ensino e Trabalho, and to like this video here on the channel and share it with anyone who may be interested in the topic. So we'd like to sincerely thank all of you for your presence and participation. It has been an incredible journey. So we'll be sharing the invitation cards for the next meetings on our social media at the beginning of the next semester. And please stay tuned. So we'll bring today's meeting to a close, a big hug, and see you soon. Thank you.
See you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.